The Power of Purity Podcast. Real talk for real men who struggle with real temptation in the real world, who are ready for real answers and real success. The Power of Purity Podcast.
Welcome to the Power of Purity Podcast, the show that empowers men to experience their sexual gift in a healthier way. Now here's your host, Tony Ingrassia.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Power of Purity Podcast. I'm glad you could join me today. The podcast that's intended to help men experience their sexual gift in a healthier way. The podcast that's intended to help men learn to control sex instead of being controlled by sex. And that's intended to help men bring their sexual gift under the authority of Christ. I'm going to try to talk about something today that's very hard to talk about and difficult to describe. Kind of like if we were standing by a campfire and you told me to grab a handful of smoke. That'd be really hard to do. And even though the smoke's really there, it's also pretty hard to grab a hold of and try to hold on to. But I'm going to do the best I can to talk about something that's pretty abstract. And if I had to give a title to this episode, I'd call it Electric Sex. And you'll see in a few moments why I'm giving it that title. But it concerns the concept of what it might look like if we could get to the place with our spouse where we're able to have the most amazing, awesome, mind-blowing, incredible, mysterious, and spiritual sex that we've ever had in our lives. And if I had to give a thesis to this episode, it would be the culture version of sex is pathetic compared to the God version of sex. Or said another way, the kind of sex that's offered to us through the viewpoint and opinion and philosophy of the culture is nothing compared to the kind of sex that God's offering us when we choose to understand and pursue and experience sex according to God's will, God's plan, and God's design. So the idea, guys, is that God's plan for sex is awesome. It's the best way we could ever experience sex. And what so many of us have done is we sell out God's version of sex to embrace the culture's viewpoint and gospel of sex. And in so doing, we're sabotaging the best that God really has for us. And so I'm going to try to talk about this concept of electric sex through 5 basic vignettes, and they're not necessarily presented in any specific order, but just kind of like a puzzle has different pieces. There's 5 different pieces to this concept of electric sex that I'm seeing. And the first one is this, in one word, imagine. Imagine sex that's shrouded with everything that's good and everything that's wonderful and delightful and pleasurable and safe. And it's stripped of everything and anything that could reduce it or take away from it or distract from it in any way. Sex that's completely devoid of any and every barrier or encumbrance or inhibition or insecurity that could detract from the fullness of the experience or pleasure in any possible way. So we're talking about sex with all the good stuff, all the best stuff, and absolutely none of the bad stuff or anything that would detract from it in any way. So we're talking about maximum eroticism, minimum shame, minimum guilt, minimum lust, maximum love, minimum taking, maximum giving, maximum playfulness, maximum connection and intimacy, maximum sharing, maximum delight, maximum devotion, minimum embarrassment, minimum inhibition, minimum insecurity, maximum curiosity, minimum self-protection, maximum trust. Well, I think you get the idea. Imagine sex at the very zenith, the pinnacle of everything that it could ever be, the most awesome, mind-blowing sex you could ever have, with absolutely nothing that would detract from it or take away from it in any way. I'm thinking maybe this is what sex was like for Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden before the fall, before sin even entered into the picture. The blessed sex that God intended when He blessed their sexual union and told them to multiply. And by the way, it should be noted that the very first thing that God said to Adam and Eve when they were both together after creation concerned the issue of their sexual union, and God blessed them accordingly. Genesis 1:28 says, God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number." Imagine sex with no shame, because shame was not yet in existence. It was only later, after they sinned, that they realized that they were naked, and therefore they felt shame. And therefore they covered themselves with leaves, which speaks of something that had gone wrong between the two of them, and something now standing between the nakedness that they were intended to share, a kind of brokenness or barrier that would now hinder their ability to be naked together without shame and its corresponding influence, as if they were now postured toward one another with a kind of insecurity that, if it had a voice, would say something like, "There's something of me that's afraid of you now. There's something of me that I feel I need to hide from you. There's something of me that feels unsafe with you. There's something of me that feels shame if I let you see me naked. There's something of me that feels shame if I let you see who I really am." And so our first vignette is simply this: imagine. Imagine sex that's completely blessed by God and sex that's completely unhindered or uninhibited in any way. Sex that's experienced with all the fullness and the richness and the depth and love and connection and intimacy and eroticism and pleasure that God always intended for us to experience in His original design and blessing. And my second vignette is this. It's from a book that I really, really love. It's called Passionate Marriage, and it's by Dr. David Snarch. The subtitle is Keeping Love and Intimacy Alive in Committed Relationships. And I highly, highly recommend this book. I cannot say enough about this book. In fact, I think it's absolutely the most brilliant book I've ever read in my life. I've had this book for some years now, and I've read and read and read and read and read this book over and over again. In fact, my copy of the book is literally fallen apart, and I've got it duct taped together. That's how much I've read this book. Anyway, chapter 3 of the book is called Your Sexual Potential, Electric Sex. And that's where I'm deriving the title of this episode, Electric Sex. Actually, I'm extrapolating from chapter 3 of Dr. Snarch's book, Passionate Marriage. And I want to share just a few thoughts with you from this chapter. Dr. Snarch discusses several really awesome principles in this chapter, including the concept that genital prime and sexual prime typically occur at vastly different ages. Or said another way, he talks about the reality that people are not ready for the best sex of their life and the most profoundly meaningful sex of their lives until they're in their 5th and 6th decade of life. Or said another way, when they're in their 50s and 60s. And I think that's kind of exciting because I happen to be 59 years old. And it has to do with the concept of personhood. And Dr. Snarch proposes this concept essentially, although he doesn't use the exact metaphor, that people are kind of like wine, and who people are sexually is kind of like a fine wine because they have the capacity to keep getting better and better and better with age. Or another way to say it is that a person who's 60 years old has lived a lot more life and has a lot more experience, and therefore has a much different and a much broader frame of reference in life, and therefore has a much deeper and richer sense of personhood behind their eyeballs than a 17-year-old, for example, and therefore has the capacity to disclose and to offer much more to another person through sexual intimacy, and to offer another person a much deeper and richer encounter through a sexual experience. Or, as Dr. Snarch says in the book, it turns out that cellulite and sexual potential are highly correlated. He then goes on in this chapter to describe what he calls the quantum model of sex. And it's this quantum model of sex that essentially makes it possible for people to experience what I might call super-duper sex. That's my term, not Dr. Snarch's. Or sex on steroids. Or fantastic, unbelievable, mind-blowing sex, are what Dr. Snarch calls in the book both electric sex or wall socket sex. Said another way, I might suggest that it's this level of sexual intimacy and experience that's beginning to approach God's original design and blessing for sex before the fall and before the entrance of sin into the world and into relationships. And that's what's totally awesome about this, you guys, is that wall socket sex does not concern primarily what's happening through the actual physical and sexual experience, or what we might say is happening on the body-to-body level during the sexual experience, but rather it concerns the idea of developing the emotional and relational availability and connection and the relational environment between two people that helps them to reach their true sexual potential and experience the most awesome and transcendent sex that they've ever experienced in their life. And by the way, this kind of sex goes far beyond what we would call sensate-focused sex, that focuses primarily on the physical stimulation and sensations that people happen to be feeling in their bodies during the sexual encounter, to the much deeper and more significant realities of the feelings that people are attaching to the physical sensations that they happen to be experiencing during the sexual encounter. And it includes the introduction of things like eroticism, desire, passion, love, and emotional connection. You see, it's in the inclusion of these kind of dynamics that add a value and depth and richness to the sexual encounter that make it far more meaningful and far more mysterious and far more fulfilling and satisfying than mere sensate-focused, lust-oriented, body-to-body sex. And that's why two strangers in a bar that hook up and end up having sex 2 hours later will never, ever have the capacity for or experience the reality of the true, awesome, erotic, mysterious, meaningful, electric, or wall socket sex of God's original design. Anyway, with all that being said about passionate marriage, this is the point I'm really getting to that I absolutely love, and it's a section that Dr. Snarch calls wall socket sex and sexual potential. And it's in this section that he attempts to describe the concept of wall socket sex, which is essentially the kind of sex that can happen at the very limits or zenith of human sexual potential. Or in other words, what would sex be like if it was absolutely the most fantastic, amazing, wonderful, fulfilling, mysterious, and spiritual sex you've ever had in your entire life? What would sex be like if you could grow and mature with your partner to the very pinnacle and the very zenith of human sexual potential? What I called earlier super-duper sex, or sex on steroids, or fantastic, unbelievable, mind-blowing sex, are what Dr. Snarch calls in the book both electric sex and wall socket sex. And it's in this section of the book that Dr. Snarch attempts to describe this level of human sexual potential in the following ways. He says that during this kind of sex, time stops. External reality fades. There's a sense of being transported to another place and time. Your consciousness changes so that, for example, separate acts blend into a single prolonged event. A million delights merge into one. Boundaries between you and your partner shift or cease to exist. You feel your partner next to you without touching, as if your bodies are intermingled. Your emotions appear on your partner's face. You see your essence embodied in your partner. He or she knows exactly how to touch you. She or he moans at the exact instant everything seems transcendently perfect to you. Your partner's face melts, taking on unusual or unexpected emphasis and character. You watch your partner undergo age changes. You know exactly what he or she looked like in childhood or will look like when they're older. You see the child and the parent in your partner. Profound mutual caring and joy overflow the bond between you. You're moved to tears, appreciating other people, past and present, and what it means to be human. In more rare and esoteric experiences, some people report seeing music or hearing feelings, which is called synesthesia, or an aura, glow, or electricity seems to radiate between the two of you. Dr. Snarch then concludes this section of his book by suggesting that it's possible for two people to create an unusual or abnormal level of energy, joy, and beauty through profound sexual union. He says that wall-socket sex is transforming. It changes the way you see life. It challenges your identity and self-worth. It can leave you feeling like a stranger in a strange land of erotic wonders. You feel like you're undergoing another puberty, as transformative as adolescence, but with nothing adolescent about it, because it pairs sexual responsiveness with increased maturity, self-understanding, and self-control. Wow. Now, I remember being completely blown away the first time I read this section of Dr. Snarch's book and thinking to myself, whatever this guy's talking about is he's describing this transcendent, euphoric level of sex at the zenith of human sexual potential. Whatever it is that he's describing here, man, I want it. This is the kind of sex that I would love to experience in my life. And I don't know if I had ever experienced anything like that because of my background and the profound brokenness and sexual disorientation of my life. You know, I have a session in the conference called Lust Sex versus Love Sex. Maybe a way to put words to what I'm talking about is I think that for many of us, we've experienced our sexual self so much on the side of lust and under the umbrella of lust in such a selfish, taking kind of way, in such a perverted way from God's original design, that we really don't know or understand or comprehend what sex is intended to be that's blessed by God. You see this awesome, intense, euphoric, wonderful experience that God intended it to be. So when I read Dr. Snarch, I thought, man, whatever this guy's describing, I think that this is what I would like to experience. It's like I intuitively sense and believe that he's attempting to describe something that's absolutely true and intended to be the reality of God's purpose and design for us to experience through the sexual union. What else could be possibly intended through the concept of the one flesh union that God teaches in the Bible? Genesis 2:24, that is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become one flesh. Through the conjugal act, a husband and wife actually become one flesh in the eyes of God. That means you're no longer two different people, but you're somehow mysteriously, spiritually united and commingled and intertwined in such a way that can only be represented in the reality that the two of you have now become one. And that brings me to my third vignette, which I'm titling this, With My Body, I Thee Worship. I love this phrase, with my body, I Thee Worship. And I first heard this phrase in the movie Shadowlands, which is the story of C.S. Lewis and his marriage to Joy Gresham. Maybe you saw the movie. It's based on a true story, of course, and C.S. Lewis married this woman, and the marriage lasted for only 4 years and 3 months because Joy passed away from terminal cancer. But in the scene of the movie, when they're getting married and they're exchanging their vows, as part of their wedding vows, this phrase appears, and it's part of the vows that they speak to one another, with my body, I Thee Worship. And I'm not sure how to explain it, and I'm not sure why, but when I heard this phrase for the first time, it felt so right to me that it was like an arrow shot right into my heart. With my body, I Thee Worship. I believe it speaks of exclusivity, because when you worship something, you give your heart and your attention and your devotion totally and exclusively to that thing. You love it. You're devoted to it. You think about it. You give your heart to it. It means everything to you. There's nothing more important to you. And because you worship it, you're totally and exclusively devoted to this thing. So when you say to another person, with my body, I Thee Worship, you're saying that your body is devoted exclusively to this other person and that you will honor them and serve them and bless them and worship them only with your body. You're saying that your body belongs to them alone. You're saying that your penis and your orgasm and your sexuality belongs to them alone. You're saying that they're the only person that the pleasure of your body will ever be offered to, that the intimacies of your physical body are reserved exclusively for them. And of course, as Christians and the people of God, we know and believe the 10 Commandments. And we know that we're called to love God supremely, and we're not to worship anything or anyone above the Lord God. But I don't believe that that's the heart of what's being spoken here through this wedding vow when people say to one another, with my body I Thee Worship. By speaking in these words, we're not saying that we love or worship our spouse or their body more than we love or worship the Lord God. But what we're recognizing and acknowledging is something about how sacred and how holy and how mystical and how exclusive the sexual union is intended to be between a husband and his wife. And that brings me to my fourth vignette, which I want to just reference the Song of Solomon, or also called the Song of Songs, which is a book in the Bible in the Old Testament. I looked it up on Wikipedia. Wikipedia says the Song of Songs is unique in its celebration of sexual love. It gives the voice of two lovers praising each other, yearning for each other, proffering invitations to enjoy. The two are in harmony, each desiring the other and rejoicing in the sexual intimacy between the two of them. The women, or daughters of Jerusalem, form a chorus kind of in the background of the lovers, functioning as an audience whose participation in the lovers' erotic encounters facilitates the participation of the reader. Christian tradition, in addition to appreciating the literal meaning of a romantic song between a man and his wife, has read the poem as an allegory of Christ, the bridegroom, and his love for his church, which is the bride. So I'm just going to read several passages here from the Songs of Song, which I think are awesome and delightful and beautiful and erotic, and just begin to invite us toward something, invite us toward this mystical, spiritual, exclusive, awesome, incredible experience that God intends for us to have in the way He designed for sex for us. Song of Solomon, chapter 1. Let him kiss me with the kisses of his mouth, for your love is more delightful than wine. Take me away with you, let us hurry. Let the king bring me into his chambers. How beautiful you are, my darling. Oh, how beautiful. Your eyes are doves. How handsome you are, my beloved. Oh, how charming. And our bed is lush. Song of Solomon, chapter 2. My beloved spoke and said to me, Arise, my darling, my beautiful one, come with me. See, the winter is past, the rains are over and gone. Flowers appear on the earth. The season of singing has come. The cooing of doves is heard in our land. The fig tree forms its early fruit. The blossoming vines spread their fragrance. Arise, come, my darling, my beautiful one, come with me. Here's some selections from Song of Solomon, chapter 4. How beautiful you are, my darling. Oh, how beautiful. Your eyes behind your veil are doves. Your lips are like a scarlet ribbon. Your mouth is lovely. Your breasts are like two fawns, like twin fawns of a gazelle that browse among the lilies. Until the day breaks and the shadows flee, I will go to the mountain of myrrh and to the hill of incense. You are altogether beautiful, my darling. There is no flaw in you. How delightful is your love, my sister, my bride. How much more pleasing is your love than wine, and the fragrance of your perfume more than any spice. Awake, north wind, and come, south wind. Blow on my garden, that its fragrance may spread everywhere. Let my beloved come into his garden and taste its choice fruits. And then selections from Song of Songs, chapter 5. I have come into my garden, my sister, my bride. I have gathered my myrrh and my spice. I have eaten my honeycomb and my honey. I have drunk my wine and my milk. I slept, but my heart was awake. Listen, my beloved is knocking. Open to me, my sister, my darling, my dove, my flawless one. Your breasts are like two fawns, like twin fawns of a gazelle. How beautiful you are and how pleasing, my love, with your delights. Your stature is like that of the palm, and your breasts like clusters of fruit. I said, I will climb the palm tree. I will take hold of its fruit. May your breasts be like the clusters of grapes on the vine, the fragrance of your breath like apples, and your mouth like the best wine. I just think it's very interesting and very beautiful and very mysterious and very curious that God would include in the Holy Bible, the Word of God, this book, the Song of Songs, with this kind of language that focuses on and celebrates the erotic love that's intended between a husband and his wife. And I believe it reveals something of the heart of God and the will and the plan and the design of God for human sexuality to be the most wonderful and awesome and mind-blowing and sensual and delicious experience that Dr. Snarch is attempting to describe through the concept of what he calls electric sex. And that brings me to the fifth vignette that I wanted to share, and I'm just calling it my personal testimony. And I want to share just a little bit of how I feel like all this relates to my own life. I totally see that I've been on a kind of sexual journey through my life, and it makes total sense to me that it essentially takes a lifetime for some of us to figure out how to experience sex in the healthy and awesome and holy way that God intended sex to be. Picture, if you will, a scale of numbers from 0 to 10. 0 on this scale is really, really bad, and 10 is really, really good. In other words, when you're at number 10, you absolutely have sex figured out. And you've worked through and figured out and overcome all your hang-ups and issues around sex, and you're as healthy as you could possibly be when it comes to sex. You're hitting on all cylinders. Well, I'd advocate that none of us come out of the gate at number 10. We all live in a very deeply and profoundly wounded and broken and fallen world, and we live in a very highly sexualized culture, right? And the world system promotes and celebrates its very perverted and lust-oriented gospel of sex. And as a result, most of us have had very unholy and ungodly and impure and lustful and shameful experiences in and around our sexual selves. And as a result, there's a lot of hurt and pain and confusion and disorientation and perversion and sin and brokenness around our understanding and experiences of sex. And because of this, most of us have experienced sex in a way that's very far removed from God's original design and will and plan for sex. Or said another way, most of us are somewhere way low on this sex scale, and many of us lean way more toward the dysfunctional side of the scale more than we do toward the functional side of the scale. In fact, I would advocate that for much of my own life, I was literally down below zero in negative numbers category. You know how you have escalating from 0, +1, +2, +3. Well, there's also a negative scale, right? Below 0, -1, -2, -3. And I feel like I started off my life in the negative category, you see. So now imagine not even being at 0, but being below 0. So now the scale really should go from -10 all the way up, escalating to 0, and then begin escalating from 0 into positive territory as you move toward the number +10. Or said another way, for much of my life, my sexual self has been defined by profound brokenness and hurt and pain and confusion and disorientation and sin and rebellion and selfishness and lust, and on it goes. You guys heard my story if you listened to the early episodes of this podcast. So I, for one, no doubt, have been on this long journey of sexual healing as I've slowly worked my way up this scale. See, as I'm growing from the person I used to be sexually toward the person that God intends for me to be sexually, from -10 to -9 to -8 to -7, finally all the way to 0, and then slowly up to 1, and then from 1 slowly to +2, and then slowly toward +3, and so forth and so on. And with all that being said, I'd like to share just 2 final thoughts as we move toward the conclusion of this episode. Number 1 is this. It's taken my wife and I 30 years to get to our honeymoon. And I'm not saying we've arrived. I'm not saying that we're perfect. I'm not saying that we have electric sex every time we have an intimate encounter. But there's absolutely no doubt that we're healthier now as individuals than we've ever been in our lives. And we're healthier now as a married couple than we've ever been in our lives. And that we're more deeply and passionately in love with each other now than we've ever been in our lives. And I guess all I'm saying here is that we're all involved in a process concerning this sex thing. And I just want to encourage you to continue to move forward as you progress on this metaphorical spectrum from the dysfunctional ways that you used to experience sex in your past to the healthier ways that you're learning to experience sex now, and then on toward the possibility of electric sex and the reality of experienced sex closer to God's original plan, purpose, and design than you ever have before. My second thought is this. It concerns something about sex that I sometimes try to explain to men when I talk to them about sex, and it's the idea that for so many years, I never really knew or understood that sex could ever be what sex has become to me at this stage in my life. And I know it's weird to say it this way, but it's the idea that I've tried to vaguely speak to in this episode about electric sex, that when you finally achieve the most fantastic, amazing, mysterious, wonderful, and spiritual sex of your life, you're going to be surprised and amazed at how little it has to do with the sex itself and how much it has to do with the person that you're sharing this awesome experience with. Because it's not about vaginas, it's not about penises, it's not about breasts and bodies and sensations and orgasms. And it is about the love and the sharing and the intimacy, the connection, the mutuality, the giving, the personhood, the emotion, the vulnerability, and the trust that can happen between two people when their hearts and their souls and their bodies are dancing and intermingled with delight and passion. Praise be to God. Or as Dr. Snarch says in his book, the beauty is not in sex, because the beauty is in people. And with that, I'm going to wrap up this episode of the Power of Purity podcast. And I'll look forward to seeing you again in our next episode. Till then, may God's very powerful love, grace, mercy, kindness, wisdom, strength, and redemption be upon your life. In Jesus' name, amen. God bless you.
Thanks for listening. Visit powerofpurity.org for more resources and information. And if this podcast has been helpful or encouraging, please invite a friend to listen. Until next time, remember, there's power in purity.
The Power of Purity.